Environmentalists in New Mexico feel U.S. Congressman Steve Pearce is on an anti-environment binge since entering office in 2010. They say Congressman Pearce is attacking environmental protections, both with his support on certain issues and his sponsorship of different legislation. In this report, we take a deeper look at Congressman Steve Pearce's environmental positions.
This is very well anchored. It'll probably stay there unless a lot of this gets washed away.
In 2006, George Farmer purchased 83 acres of land in the Burro Mountain portion of Gila National Forest. Since then, farmers work non-stop to preserve a riparian area he believes is severely damaged by erosion caused by an old road and off-road vehicles.
Well, any vehicle traffic and doing a riparian area restoration, any vehicle traffic is detrimental. So having people come on the property, even when it is duly marked as no trespassing in private property, is aggravating and it's damaging. It looks like they might have pulled in there and backed up and left.
The Gila National Forest is in the process of creating a travel management plan. The Forest Service is considering 6 options that would close various percentages of roads and limit off-road vehicle use to roads and trails. Farmer hopes whichever option they choose would close the old road up a hill from his restoration project.
You know, closing a road like this is somewhat of a non sequitur because it's already gone. We need to close the roads that are going to become like this if they're left open.
But Republican Steve Pearce is against closing any roads in the Gila and wants cross-country travel by off-road vehicles to continue with no regulations. He's even held rallies in Silver City to fight against road closures.
I'm trying to be a voice for the common man out there that is not going to be able to backpack 20 miles into the depth of the Gila forest. And so let's leave it open for everyone, not just a select few.
Forest policy expert Todd Schulke with the Centers for Biological Diversity wants to see roads like the one near Farmer's property closed.
In this area, the southern part of the Gila, it's a highly erodible area, so the damage from off-road vehicles is great and immediate, and it really doesn't take much to cause that damage. Even a couple of passes by a vehicle can create a depression in these erodible soils that makes a place for water to run, and that water will run through, particularly in our big monsoon rains, and dig down slowly and sometimes not so slowly and make the kind of ruts and arroyos that you're seeing.
Schulke doesn't understand why Congressman Pearce or anyone would fight to keep the road next to Farmer's property open.
Well, I just think the congressman is off base on his proposal to keep all the roads open. I mean, we're standing in a place that the Gila National Forest has proposed for closure. It's obviously an environmental disaster, really. And for him to propose to keep something like this open either means he doesn't understand what's going on or really just doesn't care.
Former Forest Service Chief Dale Bosworth originally proposed a national travel management plan under the administration of George W. Bush. Schulke believes part of the reason was to cut down on expensive road maintenance.
He made this proposal for a couple of reasons. One, because he was deeply aware of the sort of fiscal hole that the Forest Service had been digging itself into. I don't even know the number nationally, but it's probably in the billions in terms of the maintenance backlog, certainly hundreds of millions. And then secondly, I think he realized that they had a national level environmental problem that was only growing with the growing popularity of four-wheelers and other off-road vehicles.
Congressman Pearce says he doesn't believe the Gila road maintenance cost is significant.
I don't think the upkeep of those roads is in the big scheme of things, a very big part of the Forest Service budget.
But Schulke disagrees.
We believe that the proposal the congressman has made is just fiscally irresponsible. The Gila currently has 4,600 miles of roads. That's more road than it is between Los Angeles and Portland, Maine. It's a huge amount of roads, and the Gila can't afford to maintain them. Their best guess is that they're able to maintain about 10% per year, and according to their roads report, they have a $227 million backlog in maintenance. So they can't keep up.
We spoke with Gila Forest Service staff, and they confirm all of Schulke's data is correct. Pat McKee, who is a staff officer with the Gila National Forest, expects a decision on the Gila Travel Management Plan to be made by the end of this summer. north to Wolf Hollow Campground, Gene Osorio, a Mexican gray wolf advocate, camps in an area of the Gila where some of the remaining wild Mexican gray wolves roam. Osorio is disappointed Congressman Pearce proposed to cut federal funding again this year in House Resolution 1 for the Mexican gray wolf reintroduction program.
There are only approximately 50 Mexican gray wolves in the wild. This is not a recovered population. It's not a population that any reputable scientist would say is ready for state management.
Congressman Pearce has a different view on how to handle the Mexican gray wolf situation.
Let's release the wolf in Central Park if it's such a good deal there in New York City. Everyone is saying that we want that wolf to be back into civilization. Fine, put it there.
The congressman's House resolution proposal was shot down. However, Osorio feels Pearce is refusing to listen to any and all pro-wolf arguments.
He seems to only be listening to one message. I think he really does need to listen to some of the rest of us who have a different perception. Because if you listen only to people who are permittees in the Gila, you're going to hear one message. If you listen to all New Mexicans, or even other people in the 2nd District, I live in the 2nd District, I'm a constituent of the congressman, and yet I've never felt that I had his ear at all. I simply, when you mention the word wolves, you're no longer listened to. This is my perception. And I think this is unfortunate because I think he has a biased and very unrealistic view of what having these animals here really means.
But Congressman Pearce disagrees.
What they do is they take the most violent wolves from Arizona, the ones that have killed too much, and they bring them over here. They've already got the taste of blood in their mouth. Obviously, they're causing great problems for our ranchers. I don't think that we should allow the government to say you can't ranch anymore, which is basically what they say. They say you cannot defend your herds, you can't defend your children, you can't defend anything you can't do anything to hurt a gray wolf.
Under the Endangered Species Act, people are allowed to kill any endangered species in defending an immediate danger to human life. Also, at least 35 Mexican gray wolves have been shot illegally. According to the National Agricultural Statistics Service, in 2005, wolves accounted for less than 1% of all cattle loss. Domestic dogs killed 5 times more cattle, and coyotes killed 22 times more cattle than wolves. Respiratory and digestive problems were overwhelmingly the most significant causes of cattle loss. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there were only 9 livestock depredations attributed to Mexican gray wolves in 2010. And so far, no Mexican gray wolf has physically harmed a human since being reintroduced in the wild.
If the congressman was interested, I would be delighted to bring him out and have him camp with us sometime with a couple of women and kids, and we'll show him that this is not something to be afraid of.
Osorio says in 2007, when Congressman Pearce attempted to pass another bill to cut reintroduction funding, he stood up on the floor of the U.S. House during a committee meeting and announced that nothing is more attractive to a wolf than the sound of a crying baby. Osorio feels that's nothing more than political puffery, based in fables, myths, and Pearce's own imagination.
Well, if that were true, on that trip where we had the 11-week-old, we'd have seen a lot of wolves, because she did a fair amount of both, as 11-week-old children are prone to do. She did a lot of laughing and crying, and we saw none, no wolves. We heard no wolves on that trip, even though we were right in their territories.
Osorio admits to seeing 41 wolves in the wild, some at close range, and they've never shown any signs of aggression. She also points out the entire Mexican gray wolf reintroduction program has cost a total of $23 million since 1977, and believes cutting it wouldn't make much of a dent in the federal budget.
By putting this onto a budget bill. It's bogus, it's political, and it's only one of a series of these kinds of political actions that Pearce has taken.
Moving east to Lincoln National Forest near Cloudcroft, Kevin Bigsby, Executive Director with the Southwest Environmental Center, walks on one of many forest trails. He doesn't support Congressman Pearce's logging bill, H.R. 1202, which creates sanctuaries for spotted owls.
I was happy to hear Mr. Pearce say that he would leave it to the scientists to determine how large the spotted owl sanctuaries would be. That's exactly what's been done. The recovery plan was put together by scientists. It's this worldview that the only place for nature, wild nature, species, other forms of life on the planet is in sanctuaries, preserves, zoos. But I think that reflects a lack of understanding about how nature works and what the role that individual species play in the working of natural landscapes.
Congressman Steve Pearce defends his logging bill, saying the creation of spotted owl sanctuaries would spur timber industry jobs in New Mexico.
And I've never said that we should not have spotted owl. We should keep it alive in sanctuaries and cut timber around it. I don't think the science is verifying or validating what we're doing with respect to many of the species.
Bixby contends the spotted owl recovery plan was created with the best available science, and doing away with the current regulations would be damaging, not only to spotted owls, but to the entire forest health.
Our national forests are not timber plantations. They're not here for private companies to come in and take what they want and leave the rest, and the forest health be damned. That type of logging is not sustainable on this forest. You will have a situation where a timber company may come in and for a matter of years, maybe a decade, who knows, take what it wants, leave the rest, and leave the forest in poorer shape than it was when they started. I don't think it would keep a sawmill going for very long, and especially today, given the very reduced demand for lumber in this country, I think it's a terrible time to be talking about opening up the forest and relaxing the restrictions on the big timber cutting.
Biologist Bryan, who graduated from New Mexico State University, wants politicians like Steve Pearce to leave environmental decisions to scientists.
He wants industry like oil and gas to operate without any protections for the environment and for human health, and that's just not fair. And again, he's simply playing politics, and they're fear politics. It's not healthy for our country to be out there, ginning up anger amongst his constituents when there is no need for that, and it's simply for his own benefit. It's very disingenuous.
Congressman Pearce believes environmental regulations are standing in the way of creating more extractive industry jobs.
My major concern is jobs, oil and gas jobs, timber jobs, mining jobs.
Some people, like environmental lawyer Judy Coleman, standing on public land watching all the oil and gas rigs bob up and down near local hills in the eastern part of the state, feel Congressman Pearce puts oil and gas jobs above everything else because it's the industry that contributes the most to his campaigns.
All evidence shows that oil and gas companies are the largest contributors to his campaigns by far.
According to OpenSecrets.org, during the 2010 campaign, Congressman Pearce accepted more money from the oil and gas industry than any other member of the U.S. House. Since 2002, he's accepted more than $1,188,000 from the oil and gas industry. Still, he doesn't feel it's an excessive amount.
This economy in New Mexico is probably 25% oil economy. Far less than 25% of my money comes from oil interests. I mean, if I were going to take a percentage-wise, I should be getting a lot more.
But environmental lawyer Judy Coleman is concerned with the amount he's getting now.
Well, I think the concerns show up when there are conflicts between environmental issues and oil and gas development, which happen pretty regularly. And when those conflicts arise, it's pretty clear where his loyalty lies, and the environment suffers because of it.
One example Coleman points to, the dune sagebrush lizard. She believes the lizard is a habitat specialist.
The Shinnery Oak dune habitat that the lizard is dependent on is really, really threatened and shrinking. And not only that, but it takes a long time to develop this habitat and very quickly can be destroyed.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is considering listing the lizard as endangered because, according to Assistant Regional Director Michelle Shaughnessy, suitable habitat for the lizard has shrunk from 1 million acres to only 655,000 acres. Congressman Steve Pearce has joined rallies in the eastern part of New Mexico to fight against listing the lizard.
All we're trying to do here is make sense in policies that our government's setting, and it's that simple. We can't continue to kill our economy and in the guise of protection. I believe that it will shut down the oil and gas industry. I think it will shut down agriculture.
Mark Salvo is with WildEarth Guardians. He wants the lizard to be protected and is convinced listing the lizard will not shut down the oil and gas industry.
There's no data to support claims by Representative Pearce and industry representatives that protecting this tiny lizard in its tiny habitat will shut down oil and gas development in the Permian Basin. It's scattered across approximately 655 square miles within that region. The Permian Basin, the oil field, is 75,000 square miles, and tens of thousands of oil and gas wells have been drilled throughout the area. So the lizard occurs in less than 1% of the basin. And even this tiny range has been developed for oil and gas. More than 4,000 oil and gas wells have been drilled within that tiny area occupied by the lizard. Any oil and gas development outside of the lizard's range, 99% of the Permian Basin, will be unaffected by conservation measures for the lizard.
According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the existing oil and gas wells inside the dune sagebrush lizard's habitat will most likely be unaffected if the lizard is listed. But Steve Pearce isn't convinced. The congressman says he doesn't trust the science of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in making a listing decision.
The BLM science is actually much better and different than the science of the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Fish and Wildlife Service is picking through and choosing pieces of its science even then. There are pieces of their science that said, yes, it will affect the economy. I don't think we can manage our government, our people, our economy for a single species. I don't think the lizard is more important than people.
Charna Lefton is with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and doesn't want the oil and gas industry to suffer if the lizard is listed. She feels her organization's science is sound.
The BLM's role is not scientific publication or scientific research. The BLM manages different aspects of public land, and the Fish and Wildlife Service's task is to do the science. So I don't know that the BLM would have science, but I'm quite certain that if they did, they would have shared it with us already, since we've been working with them closely on this issue.
Congressman Pearce is also not convinced the dune sagebrush lizard is a single species.
To determine if this is the right lizard, you have to turn it upside down and count the scales between its elbow and the armpit. He's got a cousin who has one more or one less scale that is not listed as endangered. I don't think there's a DNA difference there. I have asked the Fish and Wildlife Service to show me the DNA difference. I think that it's like one brother in a family has greater height than another one.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says the dune sagebrush lizard is a separate species from other lizards, and the dune sagebrush lizard relies on different habitat to exist than other similar lizards. Mark Salvo with WildEarth Guardians agrees with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and also feels Congressman Pearce makes such arguments to curry favor with the oil and gas industry.
They are categorized by scientists and geneticists as two different species, and the service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, recognizes them as two species. It's a false argument. It's a way of generating controversy where there is no controversy, and we really think that's unfortunate. Unfortunately, I think he's doing the bidding of his major contributors to his campaign. It would seem to me that he's pulling a hoax over locals, creating a frenzy about the listing, a potential listing decision for the lizard, and causing people to be worried about their jobs and their communities when there's no basis for it. And it's all, and he's doing it all on behalf of the oil and gas industry.
Back in the Burrow Mountains region of the Gila National Forest, Todd Schulke with the Centers for Biological Diversity reflects on Steve Pearce's co-sponsorship of H.R. 1581, which would release tens of millions of acres from wilderness study protection and open them up for development.
It's really a travesty. I mean, these are the last best places that we have left in the West, and you know, it's they're really trying to circumvent the public process, which I just think is maddening. And you know, we hope he won't be successful, but this you know, this multi-pronged anti-environmental move that he's making is it's just going to be devastating to places like the Gila.
Also, in Doña Ana County, the bill would remove more than 32,000 acres from wilderness study. Scholke feels it's just another Pearce attack on the environment.
In my view, Congressman Pearce is on an anti-environmental binge. He's proposed rounding up spotted owls and putting them in camps. He's proposing a massive increase in logging. The latest bill he's put out proposes opening up millions of acres of roadless areas and wilderness study areas to development, which these places are the most pristine places left, and they deserve to be protected. So with these proposals, he's just showing a complete disregard for the landscape that we all live in and depend on for our livelihoods, for our well-being, and the things that we just care about deeply.
Pearce claims he isn't on an anti-environmental binge, and he does listen to environmentalists.
I'm on a people binge. I'm on a jobs binge. That's what it is. I listen to them. I don't hear the arguments that are very compelling that would convince me we should set aside our Constitution.
Regardless of whether the Forest Service decides to close the old road next to George Farmer's 83-acre restoration project, or if Congressman Steve Pearce is successful in rolling back environmental protections, Farmer plans to continue to work as hard as he can to make his land as healthy as possible.
More people, I think, need to really develop an understanding of their connection to the land, and that all of this, everything you're looking at here, and you and me, we're all interconnected here. We're not separate from any of this. And so when we damage the land, we damage ourselves as individuals and as a society.
For KRWG, I'm Jared Andersen. And now for a KRWG Web Extra. At the end of my interview with Gina Sorio at Wolf Hollow Campground, she reflected on the history and future of wildlife in the Gila National Forest. I share her thoughts with you now.
You know, we're standing here at a place called Wolf Hollow, and there's a campground here, a Forest Service campground. There's also a little canyon called Wolf Hollow, and this name predates, you know, probably the Forest Service. But it's not the only animal name on geographic features here. Behind the camera here are some hills called Beaver Points. So there were undoubtedly numerous beaver here. There may be a few now, but they're probably not as abundant. Behind us is a mountain called East Elk Mountain, and there's also Middle Elk and Elk Mountain. These were named after the Merriam's elk that lived in this area. That animal went completely extinct from overhunting and market hunting. The elk that are here now were reintroduced, just like our lobos are being reintroduced. So, and there are other similar names in this area. Not too far away is a Coyote Peak, and there are several others that are named after the original fauna, and these animals lived here before the Gila permittees and before Congressman Pearce, and they lived here probably before the Native Americans came into this area. These are ancient species that have been here a long, long time. And I would find it really tragic if we started finding these creatures relegated to oblivion, to extinction, and our kids and our grandkids would only find out about them by reading about them in books or seeing videos. Because they will not survive in captivity. Over time, they will lose their wildness, they will lose their ability to survive, and someday it'll be like when the last passenger pigeon died in a zoo. I don't want that to happen.